It is a story about redemption. When you've made mistakes for a long time, when you've lived a certain way for a long time, is it even possible to come back from that?
Joel, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to talk about your book, The Broken Detective. Let's get started with the book pitch.
Okay, so The Broken Detective is about a private investigator named Jake Joelson, and the book is for fans of people who love mysteries, thrillers, noir, crime novels, people who love to read the books of Dennis Lehane, George Pelicanos, people like that. And the story is about Jake and how he is going to prison. He knows he's going. It's just a matter of for how long. And thanks to a suspended sentence, he has 2 weeks to earn as much money as possible so he can support his mom, who is not very well while he's inside. And during those 2 weeks, he gets hired to find a missing woman. So he takes the case. The story is set in Winnipeg, Manitoba, my hometown. And I think it's a story that fans of thrillers will enjoy.
Thank you. And why set it in Manitoba?
Well, I guess the main reason, well, there's a couple, but the main one is that's where I've always lived. Well, for the majority of my life anyway. And I also think, I read books from crime authors, people who read stuff like James Lee Burke or Michael Connolly, and the settings in those places are so important. And I've read other Canadian authors who have set their books in other Canadian cities, but there's not very many crime thriller books set in Winnipeg. So I thought that, give me a chance to write about my city. And then as a third reason, I guess I always find it fascinating just where people are from and how, a city has so many good things, so many positives, but then at the same time, there's these like problems, issues that people who live there seem to always come back to. And Winnipeg has a few very particular ones that people always talk about when they talk about Winnipeg.
How do you balance in your storytelling place with moving the story forward at the same time? Because you did spend chunks of space to describe it and it was well done, but I'm just curious how you chose that, okay, here's an exposition where I want to talk about Winnipeg to bring it to life versus moving the plot forward.
Yeah, I think one of the things I tried to do is just not be heavy-handed with it, like try to layer in the details about Winnipeg, either like you said during short passages of exposition or even from characters and dialogue. There's one conversation I can remember right now where Jake is talking to sort of like his mentor figure, I guess, a character named Katz. And Jake is telling him how he hates Winnipeg, how there's so many things about this city he doesn't like, from the crime to the cold to the poverty and just all these things he doesn't like. And then in that conversation, they start talking about, some of the good things about the people who live here and some of the things the city has going for it. And I think through dialogue is maybe a way to get setting across to the reader without, like I say, being too blatant about it.
How much of Winnipeg ended up in the book as far as, like you mentioned, like some of the problems and things that happen?
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot of problems that happen in the book as well. How
Yeah.
many things correlate between what you know of Winnipeg versus what was been put in the book?
You know what I tried to do with that? I tried to make it like, I don't know if it's necessarily an accurate reflection of Winnipeg. I think parts of it are, but I also think a person's perspective on a place depends on who they are, where they live, what they do for a living, what their family's like, where they're from, maybe originally. So I think it's the character, the protagonist, Jake's. I think it's his version of the city. But at the same time, there are some details that have played prominently in the news here in the last probably 10 years for sure. Is just how, Winnipeg in Canada anyway had the dubious distinction of being the murder capital of Canada. So I believe we've lost that title. I think another city a little bit to our east has that title now. But for a long time, we had the most murders per capita in the country. So a detail like that is something that's, taken right from real life. As far as the communities and such, most of the streets, most of the neighborhoods are true to reality. With a couple businesses and places like that, I just made up just to sort of fit the story.
Yeah. Okay, so if I look at the streets and stuff, I could take your book down to Winnipeg and find my
Yeah,
way around. Okay.
to a certain point, you probably
Yeah.
you probably could, but a couple places, I change details and that. But yeah, there's definitely many real streets and such.
So what did the idea for the Broken Detective come from?
You know what? That's a good question. I was looking at your introduction for the guests before I came on to just see what the questions are going to be like and whatnot. But so I thought that one was coming. I think for me, I usually start with the character, and I'm interested in this, so I read a lot about how people create stories and whether they start with a plot and then they get to the character later or however it works. And I was just reading an interview, or no, I was listening to a podcast with the guy. I think his name's Brad Inglesby, who has done two really good shows. The first one was Mayor of Easttown, and the second one just came out this year, a couple months ago, called Task, starring Mark Ruffalo, and both are sort of crime thriller stories. Awesome writing. And he was talking about how he starts with character, and I think that's exactly what I do. Is I have an idea for a person who is probably down and out in some way, and I didn't know exactly what that was going to be for Jake in particular, but I started with that idea, and then I wanted to take him through the process of changing. Whether it's for the better, whether it's for the worse. I guess people will have to read the book, but maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe like all of us, we have things in our life that are hard, and we start somewhere, and where we start brings us to a certain way of living. And for Jake, he struggles with alcoholism. His mom is an alcoholic as well, and I think I just started with that idea, and then it came from there.
So do you consider yourself a plotter or a pantser when it comes to having put the story down? You had the character in mind. Did you start
Yeah,
the story with just that character and then you went to see what happened from there?
I would say I am a little bit of both. I heard the expression planter one time, which is a terrible word, but I write out one sentence for each of my chapters, and there's a certain structure I stick to as well, like a 3-act structure, and then it changes as I go. So I need to have a little bit for each chapter. I find it sometimes it's just an image or like a phrase or a sentence or something that I come up with, I see, and then I start with that. But no, I don't just sit down and write. I have a plan, but the plan does change.
Okay. How much did this plan change as you were writing it?
A lot. From the very beginning of writing this thing to where it is now, I'd say quite a bit. It took me a while to figure out what Jake's backstory was going to be. Like, I had the mystery in place. I hope it's a compelling mystery that, for people who like reading mysteries, there's clues, and Jake is a detective, so he follows the clues. But his backstory, I went, in so many different directions. I had him, at first, he was going to be a former athlete, like somebody who maybe retired from playing pro hockey or something like that, and had nothing to do with his life. At one point, he was going to be, what was the other idea I had? I forget, but there was a couple other ones before settling on, his current backstory, which is that he grew up like in and out of foster care. He had a mom. His dad disappeared when he was younger, but he lived with his mom until he got to be a certain age when he fell into the care of the province.
At its core, what would you say what kind of story this is?
I think it's a crime story. I think it's a mystery. I also think it is a story about redemption. At its core, I think the question is asked, when you've made mistakes for a long time, when you've lived a certain way for a long time, is it even possible to come back from that? And that's the question that I hope gets answered at least somewhat in the book. I also think at its core it's a family story. I think we all have families, I mean, most people do, and even if you don't know your biological family, you've probably, been in a family of sorts, or adopted, or on a team that's like a family, or a workplace that's like a family. So I think it's also a story about family and just why we need people around us who have our back.
Do you think about these themes as you're writing the book as themes that you wanted to add, or this just came as part of figuring out the backstory?
I think it just comes as I write. I honestly don't know if. I mean, I guess some writers can start with a theme that they want to communicate, like an idea of sorts. For me, I have questions, I think, before I write. And then I think as I write, I sort of figure out what the theme is. But I don't write with the intention of sharing a specific message or anything like that. I try to tell a good story first. I try to make it exciting, interesting, fun for readers, but also thoughtful. I hope there's parts of the book that make people stop and think about themselves. So,
Yeah.
no, I don't write with theme in mind. A topic, I definitely have topics and questions, but not a message.
And this is your debut thriller. Is this the first full-length novel you've written?
It is, yeah. It's my first book, so it is. It is my debut. I actually wrote it a number of years ago. So the book came out just in October, but I wrote most of it probably 2021 and 22, I would say, and then it was nominated for Best Unpublished Manuscript for an award from Crime Writers of Canada. And Crime Writers is a group. They include like noir and thriller and mysteries all in that same category. And then after that, that was 2023 when I was nominated for that award. It took me a while to find a publisher, so a few months to find someone willing to publish it, to work with me, and then it just came out this year with a small publisher, a small press. It takes a while just for everything to line up. So yes, it is my first book.
Oh, congratulations. That is a big accomplishment. I think I wrote like 4 or 5 books before I had one that I felt was actually deserving of going, even considering publication. So to do it on your first one is very impressive.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
You mentioned you're a teacher. What subject do you teach? Do you feel like that has helped you with the skill at writing?
I think it has. Like, I teach high school English, so I'm always like, my day consists of a lot of reading and writing and just talking about books and movies and TV shows. Those are areas that I love. So I think in talking about something and just working with it all the time, I think you do get better at it. Has it helped my writing, like on a prose level? I don't think so, but I think I'm around a lot of people and talk to people from all walks of life. That's for sure. Teaching a very diverse high school, so I think that can't help but broaden your horizons a little bit and just open you up to, I don't know, different ways of looking at things.
Nice. I feel like you're living the dream that I wanted to live at one time before I made
Oh
different
yeah,
decisions. Yeah, I
yeah,
wanted to teach. I wanted to teach English, and then I eventually published books. But
yeah, absolutely.
yeah, oh, that's awesome.
And you run a business now as well, right? In addition to the podcast, you have
Yeah, fitness. Yeah. I got into
fitness.
fitness instead of
Yeah,
I got into teaching, coaching fitness instead of English. So
it's
I went in a
similar in a
different
way. I
direction.
mean, I one of my kids, the father of one of my son's buddies. They're young. They're 9 years old now, but he is a personal trainer and he owns a business too. And he really is. It's funny because we talk about this stuff, but he really is a teacher. That's what he is. He's always showing people what to do. He's always trying to build rapport with people. He's got an expertise in the area. Like, so there are a lot of, I think, similarities in the fitness world. I think
Yeah,
people who are really passionate about it, I think there are similarities
yeah,
to teaching in a school.
yeah. When readers finish this book, what are you hoping they're going to be thinking or feeling as they put it down?
I hope that I hope they're surprised. Okay, I hope they're surprised because I did work hard to make the ending strong. But on a deeper level, I guess maybe it puts them in a spot where they're forced to think about people who they write off. People who we all, I shouldn't say they, but we all sort of judge, I guess, right? Like you meet somebody and it's within a few seconds you're sort of making all these interpretations, and that's fine. But I also think it's a good thing for a person just to go back and think about the people you meet and what their lives are like and where they come from and what their motivations are, and then look at yourself as well. I think it's a book that can keep you entertained, but also at the end of it, I hope it has made you think a little bit as well.
I just finished it yesterday, and it did have that effect on me. I really enjoyed the story, really enjoyed the ending, and there were some deep messages we'll talk a little bit about too during the story that certainly had me thinking at the end. And it reminds me of that you never know what someone else has been through when you see them. You can see someone at a
For
grocery
sure.
store who's really upset, but you don't know why they're upset or what their day was like. And I
Yeah.
think this story helps reflect that in a way because of what he's going through
Yeah.
and everything and the perspective of all the different characters in their lives. And even to the very end, which we can't talk about right now, but we'll get into a little bit later.
Sure. Yeah, no, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. I think what you said is absolutely true. It's everyone has a story, and when you get to know someone's story, I think you maybe don't like something they've done, and I also think that's okay as well. You don't have to like what somebody's done to maybe empathize a little bit or understand them a little more. I think that's maybe where fiction and stories in general, whether it's a thriller or a different novel that I assigned to some of my students in high school, maybe the that's where stories can help a little bit with that empathy piece.
Yeah. What research went into this for you?
I had to learn a lot about like extremist groups and just the thinking. So I've read a couple different books along the way. Under the Banner of Heaven is one I can recall by John Krakauer, just to try to get into that mindset and understand a little bit more about fundamentalism. By no means do I think I've covered it all or anything like that, but I think during the writing it put me in the headspace to try to understand the characters. I also did quite a bit of research and spoke to people about like group homes and foster care and just what some of those experience of experiences have been for people, and how, I mean, there's no one experience for any of this stuff. People have their own situations, but I think there are some common threads that people do experience when they go through something like being removed from their home, taken from their parents, and when they grow up in a foster care system. I think it's like I say, I think the experiences are different, but I do think there are some similarities as well. So yeah, I did research on those two areas most, and then just tons of reading. Like I love crime thrillers. I love reading in general, to be honest, and just reading some of my favorite authors' work is, I think, one of the best ways to figure out how you want your own stories to be.
When you're creating these characters, even the side characters, do you have like a chart or something of their names and like the traumas they've been through and how they've dealt with those traumas? Because there's a lot of
Yeah.
overlap, and trauma is kind of a theme throughout the book, the different types of trauma, whether it was sexual or through with the church or with alcoholism. Like there's a lot of trauma and everyone has dealt with
Yeah.
it differently.
No, that's a good question. I think I do keep track of the characters. I don't put everything in like it's a Word document where I have a picture of what I think the person looks like on the one side, with just some details, their name, some of the stuff they've been through, like you say. I also think that during the process of writing it, I'm a very routine person, so I write every day, even if it's for a very short amount of time. So I think when I'm in the process of writing, I live with the characters enough that I can usually remember, who they are. What I
Hmm.
found to be a major challenge is after not having worked with the book in a while, in between like my award nomination in 23 and then revisiting it this year to do the final edits with the editor from Runamuck. That was a new experience, having to reread it and just remember and learn the characters again. It did feel like a little bit of, I don't know if a challenge, but it definitely took me some time to get back into it and just to keep everything straight. just from one scene to the next, from one character to the next, trying not to repeat the same story or the same background, although some of them are definitely similar.
Why first person point of view instead of third, instead of telling us? Because I mean, I guess I don't read a whole lot of detective stories, but I've read
Yeah.
some, and a lot of times you get a chapter from the villain's point of view, or you get a chapter from someone else's point of view. But that's usually a third person told story. You went with first person. Just curious how that decision came and why.
I think because it's my first book, and for whatever reason, I was actually talking to somebody about this the other day too. They messaged me and just kind of asked about it, but for me, it's easier. And honestly, that's the real answer. Is I just find first person easier. Since I've written a book in third person, like with multiple points of view and such, and I think I think it's harder. I think it really is harder for me to write in third person. The person who I was talking to said the opposite and said they just can't write in first person. They feel like they're being pretentious or something, like always talking about them. But they said third person is just more natural. And for me, I think first person is, even though I really enjoy reading third person. So in the future, I'll probably do both, but that's how it came about. Honestly, it was just my first, I guess, book, so that's where I went with it. I didn't even think about it. To be honest, I thought, so many detective novels, so many crime novels, thrillers. I'm trying to think of a good thriller that's in first person. It probably take me a while, but I think a lot of crime novels are in first person, especially the first book of an author.
I was thinking, I think like Michael Connolly and that has done a lot of third, right?
Yeah, I
Compared
think
to first.
Connolly probably has. With his Harry Bosch, he's actually done both. I can remember he switched like mid-series, then he went back to the original, which maybe was third person. But yeah, he's definitely used third.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
When you were crafting Jake's character as a broken detective, how did you not make him unlikable? Balancing the line between, because there were moments in the book where I borderline didn't like him, but then he
Yeah.
kind of redeemed himself almost immediately after. But it was like it was a struggle at times. It was real, which is what I liked about it, because I was,
Yeah.
those struggles were just real coming across. But at the same time, there's a risk of this behavior is borderline unlikable the way he's acting.
Yeah. I think what I tried to do with that, I tried to, with the character, with his mom, I tried to make the scenes between Jake and his mom show that he is a kind, loving person. And even though he does some things that are unlikable, whether it's his drinking or just some of the violence that's in the book and things like that, I hope that what shines through more is the fact that this is a loyal character who, if you're on his team, if he cares about you, he's gonna go through anything for you. And at one part of the book, he says something like, "If you hurt people I care about, then I will hurt you," basically. And I think there's always been kind of this idea. I'm thinking about, for some reason, John Wick just popped in my head right now. The John Wick movies, of how, at the beginning of that first movie anyway, you can, I think it's his dog that gets killed at the
Yeah,
beginning, right?
yeah.
And he goes on this like rampage, but I mean, I like him. I like the character, even though some of the things he's doing, of course, it's terrible. Now that's an action movie where you can see the character and you get more of that, like the actor's performance, of course. But I think characters can do unlikable things if if the baseline of the character is still good. And
Yeah,
I hope Jake reads like that. I think he does.
yeah.
That he is a good person. The way he grew up, living in survival mode for a good chunk of every day of his life, I think hardened him. And I think he had to do things that he felt were necessary for survival. And sometimes when people cope with life, they don't do it in the right way. So I
Yeah.
think there's some of that in there too. But I hope at the end of the day he still is somebody that you see as if not likable, then maybe understandable,
Yeah. Relatable for sure.
relatable perhaps. Yeah, in
Yeah.
some ways.
Yeah. I have a question from Karen Osborne, who was the last guest on the show. She wants to know how your book cover came together.
Interesting. The book cover came together because I wanted to have, and I was allowed input too. I have to say I had quite a bit of input. I wanted to have my first idea was a character was like not the silhouette, but just somebody sitting at a bar, and you see their back straight on with the bottles behind, and then the yellow. I wanted the yellow on black. I thought that would be good. The person who did the cover at Trouble Light sort of came up with some photos, and it has the same idea with the character or the image just slightly turned just a little bit, so you can see how you get. He's not directly, it's not straight on, but it's just from the side. But that's how the cover came to be, and I think it fits the genre, the crime, thriller, noir, mystery type genre. So I was very mindful to try to make it as not unique as possible, to be honest. But I wanted, when you look at it, okay, that's a book in this particular genre.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. What advice would you give someone who just published their first or second book?
The advice I would give somebody who just published, I would say that the best thing you can do, or I guess my advice would be, not the best thing, but my advice would be to make sure your perspective is playing the long game, so that if you come into this thing thinking you're going to sell 10,000 copies or make $1 million or something, you should probably rethink that and try to build an audience slowly with every novel, with every book. And if I had to give a second piece of advice, it would be to connect with other writers. I think one of the best things for me about this whole writing gig is just like meeting people from all over the place, usually on social media, who after a few years, we edit each other's work, we communicate by email, or we help each other out with blurbs, and you do have a little community where it doesn't feel like you're doing it on your own. And I think those would be the two pieces of advice. Just make sure we have like the right mindset, like go into this thinking you're going to write 10, 15 books and build slowly. And then the second one is just connect with people, try to help them. And if you help somebody, they will definitely pay it back at some point.
Yeah, thank you. Your long game, have you started another book? And is it going to be a series from The Broken Detective, or are you going somewhere else?
I've written a couple since I wrote The Broken Detective. So the second one in the series is done, but it's just a first draft, so there's a lot of work that would still need to go into it. And that I hope to have out. It's probably going to be a little bit of a wait, but at some point in the next year to 2 years, I think the sequel will be out. I've also written another standalone. That's the one that's in third person, that I think is probably a thriller. It is more of a... It happens in a shorter period of time, and I've really tried with the different perspectives to push the speed of it and to try to just get that momentum with regard to the characters trying to solve the problem, I guess, the conflict in that story. So yeah, I've written a couple books since then, and I'm always working on something. Where they're going to come out or when is the question. It's a very, I think, interesting time in publishing, because there are so many books out there. There are so many authors. There's so much content in social media and streaming services. So it really is, I think, a challenge, and it's probably harder than ever to find readers, right? So that's really what I'm trying right now, is just to find people to get the book in the hands of podcasters like yourselves, to try to get on to talk about it, and just to kind of build that audience one person at a time.
Yeah. I will happily be talking about it. It was a great book.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Where can readers find your book?
You can go to, if you go to my website, which is J, the letter J, Nedecky.com, there's links to the different places you can buy it. I mean, there's always Amazon, which is probably the most convenient place to get it. In Canada, you can also go to like a McNally Robinson, like a local bookstore like that will have it, or some of the indie bookshops will be able to order it for you. In the States, you can get it from Barnes and Noble as well. It'll be available there as well.
All right, that's great. I will link to that in the show notes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your time. This is the end of the main show. I really appreciate you taking the time. If you don't mind sticking around, we're going to do a quick spoiler full section because I want to ask a couple of questions about the end of the book so listeners know. Stop here. This is where you don't want to listen if you want to read the book first, and then I have a couple of additional questions, and then we'll get into the after show.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds good. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So spoiling the end. Again, listeners, if you do not want to know how this book ends, do not listen to this part of the show. The ending was quite sad. When you crafted it, was it told this way the first time with... I was almost expecting the judge to almost give like a leniency or something to come back and say... like, oh, you did all these things. I'm so impressed. Maybe we'll give you a few months and you can be with your mom or probation or something. But you didn't. Yeah. You didn't go that route. You went with like, okay, here's what you did.
I had a couple people comment on that. Like I had an agent actually contact me talking about the book. Like this is before I signed with Run Amok even, and they wanted me to change it to a story about how the character Corey Francis, who is not really in the book at all, but that's the person who Jake assaulted, who he has to write this letter of apology to just to get the suspended sentence and the shorter sentence. The agent thought that it would be a better story if that guy had come back to sort of try to get revenge against Jake. And if something happened with that at the end, or like if I would have earlier in the book had Corey Francis be a character, then he could have come back at the end and maybe it would end on some kind of a showdown between these two. Yeah. And the other thing I could have done is, like you said, let the character off and not send them to prison. The reason I didn't do that is because book 2 opens, I thought it would be interesting to open book 2 like 13 months down the line, where he gets out of prison and now he's got all this money because he was forced to take the money at the end of the book, exactly. As well. And I just think that's interesting. You got this guy who is trying to get sober. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't after prison. And then he's now got all this money. He's got no job. He's got very little family. And I just thought that was interesting to see what he would do with the money. Mm-hmm. So as far as it being sad, I think that's true to life. I think a lot of things are sad, but what I've noticed as I've gotten older is that sometimes I feel sad, but I also kind of feel good at the same time. And it's a weird balance where I think Jake, it is sad, man. He's going to jail. I mean, that's one of the worst places a person can go. Yeah. But at the same time, if it gets him to stop drinking and to try a different way of living, then I think there's some joy in that as well.
Yeah. Well, also at the end, because I'll add more sadness to the your question, is Kat's losing it and crumbling in the end. That killed me too, because seeing it, I know he lost his wife, and he's at the funeral, and I get it. So you set it up to make total sense and be within the book, but at the same time, I was like, damn, really? Why, Katz? Why did you do it?
I think why I did it is I always like things when they get reversed. Like in a story, like when I try to teach students too, and they have these ideas, and a lot of them, like, they're smart people, but they come in with like almost a cliche idea or an idea we've sort of seen, and I'm like, okay, like flip this around. So the idea for me that I thought was interesting is like, okay, you got this character Jake who's a drunk, who has not been sober for very long, and then you have his mentor who is many, many, many years sober, who is smart, who has found a good way of living for like 20 years or whatever it is, and now you have the newly sober person mentoring the older. Like that's interesting to me. So I
Yeah.
really tried to take the idea and just like flip it for the ending.
Yeah.
And also I like the idea that you never get there in life. Like we're never gonna like fitness, for example, too, right? To get back to that, like you could be in the best shape of your life one day. And I know many actors talk about getting in shape for a role. And then I think it was Jake Gyllenhaal who said something like, he did that boxing movie, and it's like 2 weeks later, he hadn't worked out or whatever, and it's already his body is so different in 2 weeks. And I think you have to keep doing the thing. And that's just like being sober is the same. If you want to keep living sober, you got to sort of put in the work, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting.
I also like that it humanized Katz in a sense
Right.
that it's like even though he had gone 20 years, that doesn't mean all our demons are gone and everything
Nope.
is fine and happily ever after.
That's
That was
so
good too. I was
so
still
true.
sad, but it was
Yeah,
good.
no, I agree. I think you're. It's like all of us. Like it's life is awesome. It's very exciting and it's interesting. And some days are boring and everything else, but it's hard and there are sad things in the world. And I think that maybe the book taps into that a little bit.